Welcome to the Livvin for Food pod with none other than your host, myself, Olivia Bria. Sorry, I was trying out a new intro there. This week on the pod, I interviewed the wonderful Grace Lin. Grace is a New York Times bestselling author and illustrator who focuses on Asian American and Pacific Islander art and storytelling. She taught me some interesting historics and mythology behind your favorite Chinese food, some of which you most definitely would not expect. So please join me in welcoming Grace Lin.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Hi, and great to meet you. Thank you so much for coming on. I'm excited to speak with you. You've got a lot of accomplishments, so I'm excited to dive in them all.
Oh, thanks. I'm so happy to be here.
Of course. And I'm a fellow writer. I don't know if you knew that too. So I've a lot of writing questions coming your way.
Okay, good. I'm better at the writing questions than I am at the cooking questions, so I'm happy to go in that direction.
Yeah, that's what I figured, but just to make sure. So let's get into your food background first. So one thing that I loved reading about as I was researching is that before becoming an illustrator and children's book writer, you wanted to be a champion ice skater.
Yes.
Was that something you tried at a young age or just something you enjoyed doing?
It was never a serious thing. I grew up in upstate New York, which is very, very cold, and there's ice skating. And so we did go ice skating when I was younger, like third grade, fourth grade. But it was never anything serious, right? But I remember in second grade, I feel like that's when like Dorothy Hamill, I'm probably showing my age, but Dorothy Hamill was the big thing.
No, I didn't know Dorothy. I was a figure skater for a while, so I know Dorothy.
Yeah, and I remember just being like, I want to be like her. And so I remember in second grade being like, I want to learn how to ice skate. I want to be an ice skater. And so my parents were like, okay, we'll go ice skating. And then, but it was summertime. I don't know why. It was summer that I found out about Dorothy Hamill. So, but you have to wait until winter. So I used to draw pictures of myself as an ice skater, like over and over and over again until winter came. And we finally went ice skating. And I realized that I did not find ice skating as much fun as as drawing myself as an ice skater. So I realized quite quickly that drawing was more fun for me than was more where my talents lied.
Yeah, I understand that. You just brought back something that I did when I was younger because I was a figure skater when I was younger, but only until high school. I kind of stopped. But Dorothy Hamill was like my idol for a few years. I totally forgot. Like I did a whole school project on her and everything. I loved her. What an icon.
I even wrote her a letter and she sent me a photo, because it's back then. They sent a little black white photo where she signed and I hung it up. But I knew, even though I admired her quite a bit and I admire figure skaters quite a bit, I knew I didn't have it in me, or I didn't have the desire to really go all the way to become one.
Yeah, that's why I stopped before high school. They were like, you either wake up at 5 a.m. every day and you fully commit, or you don't. And I chose
and
the
they
path
were doing still like figures, like you had to do, like now I know that they don't have, it's just mainly free skating, which I probably would have gotten a lot more into, but back then it was like you had to be able to do the figures and you had to practice the figures over and over again. I was like, I don't want to do that.
I know. I had to take a few tests you have to take a few tests to pass. And those were very formal. Like you have to do the certain figures, and that's where I slowly declined.
Like interchange loop and stuff like that. Yeah, I was like, no, that's no fun.
Yeah, exactly. But you have two sisters, both of which became scientists, and then you became an artist. What was the dynamic in your family like?
Well, my parents are immigrants. They're from Taiwan. And so we were the first ones born here in the United States. So, it was a little bit, we were a little bit of the stereotype I guess the reason why it's a stereotype is because it is very common, where like my parents were very much like, you have to be a doctor or a lawyer or you have to like be something very academically high. And so my sisters, both of them, achieved that very well. My older sister, I feel like she was like salutatorian, and my younger sister was like up there too. Like maybe she was salutatorian. I don't know. They were both very high up there. My older sister went to MIT.
Yeah.
My younger sister went to University of Chicago, but I was the black sheep. And I went to art school, to their great horror. So the dynamic in the family was that that I was kind of the one that they were like, oh no, what's she going to do? They were quite worried about me most of the time. I remember once we went on a vacation to Europe, and there was like a street artist, and my dad like took out money from his wallet and put it in the street artist hat. He's like, that's going to be you someday.
Oh, so he was supportive.
Yeah, so he was supportive in his own way. So they tried their best to be supportive of what I wanted to do, but they found it very, very difficult to understand what I wanted to do.
Yeah, because they were probably taught to go one way, so they didn't know what to do when you threw them a little curveball.
Yeah, I think so. And I'm not sure why I had it in me to throw them that curveball, but I did.
It was your passion.
Yeah, no, it was my passion, but I was also very stubborn too. Like I think there's a lot of other friends and cousins and colleagues who also had certain passions, but they were a lot more docile. I think I was a little bit more headstrong.
I have that gene sometimes.
Yes.
Do things because you're stubborn, but then it works out.
Yeah, it worked. I have to say it worked to my benefit, which I'm glad. But now that I have a daughter of my own, I'm like, oh,
it makes sense.
I'm getting a taste of it.
I know. My parents were worried when I moved to the West Coast as a freelance writer, so their concerns were valid.
Yeah, I mean, and it's understandable, completely understandable. But we all have to live our own lives. I think that's the biggest thing that was hard for my parents as Asian immigrants, because in the Asian culture, your kids are seen as an extension of yourself. And so really, like, kids aren't supposed to have like their own lives and dreams. They're supposed to just extend your own, and like that's kind of like the idea. But here in the United States, the idea is like we live our own lives and we make our own choices, and that's kind of the beauty of it, but also the heartbreak of many immigrant families, I think, of coming to that realization.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Total opposite.
Mm-hmm.
Completely. And then when you're grown up one way and you're thinking your kids are going to carry on whatever legacy you envision for them, and then that doesn't happen, it is a little bit heartbreaking for them, but it's also a lot of pressure on you.
Yeah. And I think it's also really nice. I think in the end, though, I think the way that we live here in the United States, in some ways, is illuminating, though, because there's more than one way to carry on a legacy, And so I think, at least in my family, I think that my parents have slowly realized, oh, she is still carrying on legacy. It's just in a way that they never planned. So I think it works out in the end. It's just a lot of adjustment.
I mean, life is just a big adjustment, I feel like, everywhere you turn. So let's get into the topic of why we're here, and that's food. So we'll get into the beginning of your career in a second because I want to get into that background, but I'm going to jump ahead to talk about your most recent book, Chinese Menu. It's about the history, myths, and legends behind your favorite foods, but was your family deeply rooted in your heritage growing up, since you mentioned they were immigrants, or an interest you found later on in life?
Kind of both. Okay, so I mentioned that I grew up in upstate New York, and we were actually the only Asian family in the area, only marginalized family in the area when I was a child. Many more like many more Asian families moved in later on. But when I was in elementary school, we were the only Asian family. So that meant I was the only Asian girl in my school, except for my sisters. And so for a long time, I really rejected my Asian heritage. And in lots of ways, it was really easy to reject my Asian heritage because back then there was nobody that looked like me anywhere, nobody on TV or movies or magazines. So it was really easy for me in many ways to pretend that I wasn't Asian. And then when I grew older, I realized how much I had missed, and I wanted to really embrace those roots that I had kind of rejected. And so I was kind of really searching for my Asian roots as I grew into adulthood. And when I did look for them, I found that there was a couple of roots that did connect me to that part of my heritage. And the two roots that were the strongest were the stories and the food. And so I really leaned into those hard. And I really, especially, and this book, especially Chinese Menu, is kind of a culmination of those two roots like intertwined together to make this book because we ate Chinese food every day at home. My father would tell stories about this Chinese food that we ate at home, so it's really this book is like my strongest connection to my own heritage that I have. So that's why I'm delighted to share it with the world.
Yeah, that's such a beautiful thing to be able to do it for yourself, but then have something tangible that you can show other people and hopefully impart that kind of wisdom and everything you learned in that journey on others and have them learn, especially children.
Yeah.
Didn't have, when you said you didn't identify or you at least tried to kind of
pretend that it didn't exist.
Yeah,
well,
exactly.
And the idea being that, like, hopefully a book like this, and of course all of my books, because they all deal with Asian American culture or Asian culture, or feature Asian characters, it's kind of like a way that I hope that instills pride in young Asian kids in a way that I didn't have. So it's all interconnected and intertwined.
It all comes full circle. It's a great thing. You mentioned you had quite a few Chinese dishes when you were growing up. Was there a Chinese dish that was a staple in your family?
Yeah, so it's interesting because there was one Chinese restaurant in our town, but whenever we went out of our town, we also only ate at Chinese restaurants. So the only restaurants that I ever experienced as a child was Chinese restaurants. So, which was really funny. But even though it was Chinese restaurants, the food that we had at the Chinese restaurant was different than the food my mom served at home, even though they were both Chinese food. And
it's Chinese American.
Yes. And so as time went on, I started realizing, like, oh, the food at the restaurant is American Chinese food, and the food that my mom cooks is more traditional Chinese. And it was fun to kind of, in my book, to kind of find the connections between the two.
Yeah, I was wondering.
Oh, so you were asking about, and you were asking about which dishes. And so the book Chinese Menu, it's about the American Chinese restaurant food. And there's only one recipe in the book. And the reason why there's only one recipe in the book was because, like I said, there was very few things that were in the restaurant that my mom cooked as well, and one of the few things was scallion pancakes, and so that's why the scallion pancake is in the recipe is in the book. So scallion pancakes, dumplings, those were things that we had at home as well as in the restaurant. But a lot of the other things my mom never cooked at home, like mushu pork, we never had that at home. We never had kung pao chicken or anything like that. So,
right.
But we ate it all the time at the restaurant.
Yeah, I know. Me too. I'm guilty of that for sure. Scallion pancakes, I think I've only had those once in my life, and they were at a food festival, so I'm not even sure that they were like crazy authentic. But.
Yeah, they're pretty authentic, actually. But sometimes they can be, you have to make sure you get them at a good place, because sometimes they can be like really too doughy, but if you get them at the right place, they're really good.
Okay, yeah, I think that was my problem, because they just tasted like dough.
Yeah, you have to get somebody who can make them really like flaky and crispy and,
Okay, so I'm coming over to your house then. Or I'll make them from your book, either one.
They're one of those recipes, though, that are specifically, they look simple, but they're not easy. And the scallion pancakes are kind of like that. They were popularized by Chinese Buddhist monk who always carried like flour, onions, and oil with him, and salt to make these pancakes, because the ingredients are so simple. But the way to make it is actually not complicated, but there's like the rolling, and then there's the coiling, and then there's the rolling again, like to make them so that they taste flaky and delicious the way that they're supposed to. You have to go through the many step process to make sure. Otherwise, they just taste kind of really bready.
Yeah, that's an art form too. Any kind of heritage and cuisine is. I think the worst dish I've ever made, this was definitely, I think, Chinese American dish. I'm really actually a good cook, but for some reason I could not carry out this recipe because there was so many steps. It was orange chicken.
Yeah.
Yeah, what was up with that? My dad was like, "What is that smell? It does not smell good in here." And I was like, "I don't know what I did. I think I browned it too much or something went awry." But
Well,
that was my first attempt.
that's what I think is so interesting about American Chinese food, and that's one of the reasons why I made the book, is because a lot of people equate American Chinese food as cheap food, right? And so it's because we equate it as cheap food, we think that it's not high quality. But really, American Chinese food is just as difficult to make as French food. It's got just as many steps, and you need to know how to do it, like when to brown it and all. Like you need to have that touch just as much as you do with a lot of French cuisine. Yet French cuisine we have put on this pedestal, and Chinese cuisine we have not. So that's really one of the reasons why I did this book, with the hope that this book gives American Chinese food a little bit more respect.
That is so true. That's not a distinction I ever made because, yeah, French is considered a higher cuisine because of the amount of intricacy that goes into it. But Chinese food has the same amount of intricacy and it's just maybe faster, and then people equate it to, but it's not really though.
No, it's not really. The reason is it's historic. I mean, the reason it's a historic reason why we equate it as cheap food, and that's because of the Chinese immigrants that came during the gold rush. And when they opened their Chinese restaurants, they had to price their food super, super cheap to get people to try it. And so because they priced their food so cheap, it was cheap food, and so, but that's a stigma that has not gone away over all these years.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely correct. Would you say that you think that's probably the biggest misconception that the United States has about Chinese food in general?
I think that is probably a big one. I think the fact that that they think it's a cheap food that doesn't have this beautiful, rich history that, like I said, like French food has. I think that's probably one of the biggest. Another misconception, I don't know if misconception is the right word, but now that we've gotten so many more, we've been exposed to so much more of what we quote unquote call authentic cuisine, authentic Chinese cuisine. So many of us kind of look down at the American Chinese food, like, oh, kung pao chicken, and we kind of say, oh, it's not really Chinese. That always kind of bothers me too, because it's true, the food that we eat at the Chinese restaurants here in the United States is quite different than the food that are in the restaurants in China. But that doesn't mean it's worse. It just means it's different. And in fact, it means, it's been altered and adapted to American tastes. And I think the second biggest misconception is how people call this food Chinese food when it's actually really American food, because it's been so adapted to American taste. So like during the pandemic, people would go eat at the pizza joint down the street, and they would eat at the hamburger joint, but they wouldn't eat at the Chinese restaurant because they were so scared of that, it was from China, But what was so, to me, ridiculous about that was that Chinese restaurant had been there probably since like the 1920s, so like that Chinese restaurant was just as American as the pizza shop, as the hamburger joint. And I think that's the second biggest misconception is that that people in the United States don't realize how American this Chinese food actually is. And and that it's something to be proud of, not something to disparage, the fact that it's a bit Americanized. Like just the way we're proud of hamburgers and the way we're proud of pizza, like it's the same thing.
Yeah, that's a really great point. It's just another iteration of a cuisine that we love and want to try. It's like Taiwanese American or I mean, yeah, no, that was correct. Yeah. Thai food. I was thinking Thai food. Or Italian American, like half the food here you get that's Italian isn't truly Italian, But that's a great point to realize that these establishments really are American to the core.
Yeah.
And that's not a distinction that a lot of people make. Mm-hmm. So hopefully they'll learn now through this podcast.
And hopefully the thing is that because this food has been so Americanized, that means if you're American, you can claim it no matter what your mm-hmm. racial background is, like, because it's American Chinese food. So like you can claim part of it. And so it's ours, all of us, so like, and I think that's something people here don't think. They still think it's foreign food and that it's not a part of their own culture, but it is.
I like that a lot. That's honestly a distinction I never really made myself, I guess maybe because I didn't think that in depth about it. Because when you go to the store, you're just like, I crave Chinese food. And then that's really the deepest you'll go. People mm-hmm. don't really think as much ahead as maybe they should sometimes. Your first book, The Ugly Vegetables, was published in 1999. That book quickly went into success. It won an award, was nominated for one, among other accolades. Let's first get into how the concept for the book came out and then how you felt about the quick success.
Sure. Though I have to, The Ugly Vegetables did not have quick success, to be honest. It was...
Oh, okay. I read that somewhere, but, so definitely correct.
Yeah, so it did not have quick success. Here, I'll give you the background, and then, but it did have sustained success, which is in some ways even better than quick success,
Oh, that's better.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I graduated from the Rhode Island School of Design in, 1995, I think.
You don't have to give all the dates.
I know. Okay. I'll give you all the dates, so now everybody can calculate my age. In children's book, in illustration, with specific goal to become a children's book illustrator. And back then, that was before the internet. So, no Instagram, no websites. And so what you did was you just sent postcards of your artwork to different publishers all over the country and hope that somebody would pick up your postcard and say, I like this art. Let's hire her to do a book. So that was quite difficult. So I sent out thousands and thousands and thousands of postcards until about 1997. Yeah, 1997. So 2 years, I was sending out thousands of postcards. 97. Finally, I heard from somebody who said, I've been getting your postcards for the past 2 years. I really like your work, but I've never been able to find any stories that match your artwork. Do you have any stories that go with your artwork, especially this last card you sent me? I really like it. And the card that I sent him was a picture of me and my mom. It was based on a memory of me and my mom working in the garden. And so I was like, oh, okay. Yes, I have lots of stories, which I didn't, but you'll have to grab any opportunity. So I wrote the story about me and my mom in the garden, how she would grow Chinese vegetables in the garden while everybody else in the neighborhood would grow flowers. And I used to be really embarrassed. And so I wrote that story. I sent it in, and to make a long story short, because remember, this is 97, so 98, the book didn't come out to 99. So it was quite a journey. A lot of revision, a lot of this, a lot of that. It became my first published book, The Ugly Vegetables. Now, this book was published as a very, very small publisher. Now they're kind of mid-sized. It's Charles Bridge Publishing. But back then they were very, very small. My book, The Ugly Vegetables, was their very first fiction picture book. Up to then, they had only published nonfiction books. And so the book got 1-star review, and it got on like 2 like best recommended year-end reading list books. And to a big, especially now, like a big 5 publisher now, like they'd be like, who cares? But to Charles Bridge back then, which was a small publisher, this being their very first fiction book, they're like, yay, this is amazing. They were so excited.
You're a legend.
Yeah, so they were like so excited, and they were it was a big deal to them. They really tried to support the book, and like I said, it wasn't a huge success, but it was sustained. And then over the years, it just kind of, it's been still like chugging away, and now it's still in print and it's earning me royalties. So I'm very grateful to it, and I still love it. So that's so it's a sustained success of that book.
Okay. And then from there, you went on to write more than a dozen books, give or take. Because you had your first book, it was kind of their first fiction book. Did you feel more pressure writing your second book for it to kind of do well? Or, I mean, you said sustained success, so.
It was a much different, nowadays I definitely would feel that. And I actually feel it much more now than I did back then. It was a different publishing landscape back then, number one. And number two, I was so green that I didn't really understand how things worked. And kind of like that like ignorance is such a gift. Like back then, you have to remember, like I said, this is pre-internet days, and also this is pre-Harry Potter days. So back then, publishers, especially in children's books, were really willing to give authors and illustrators many more chances than they are now. Like now, you kind of have, at least my impression, I won't speak for everybody, but my impression is like you have 1 or 2 to maybe 3 books to kind of like prove yourself. Back then, I mean, they used to have children's book authors and illustrators, publish like 8 or 10 books, but they believed in them, and it might take their 8th book before they kind of quote unquote broke out, right? But they were fine with it because the children's book department was not expected to make money back then. like I said, it was like pre Harry Potter. Like it was just this cute little thing that like the publisher was like, oh yeah, whatever you do. So much has changed since then. Was I nervous about my second book? Yes and no, but nowhere near as much as I am honestly now. Every time I put out a new book, like now it feels much more do or die. It's kind of like now it feels like you're only as good as your last book. Back then it was kind of like, oh, we're building your career,
Right, and that's how I feel like it should be. I mean, your career should be all of your accomplishments tied in one, not your most recent. It's interesting that you described it in terms of pre-Harry Potter. That's not something I really thought about in terms of how it affected the publishing world, because now everyone's looking for the next Harry Potter or the series to monetize
Harry
it
Potter
more.
really changed everything in the publishing world, especially in the children's department. Like I said, up until that point, they didn't really expect children's books to make that much money. I mean, as long as they didn't lose money, they were fine. But like Harry Potter showed that they could make money, and so the expectations got super high. And of course, with higher expectations, it's a lot tougher,
Oh, yeah, I totally understand that. I think the books that I read growing up, the Magic Treehouse series, it's a big one. Geronimo's still in. Do you know that one? I was obsessed with Geronimo still. So cute. I think my sister did more of Magic Treehouse than me. I never got too into it, but the Percy Jackson series, I was into that. I love all the mythology and stuff behind that. That was so cool. When it came out into a movie, that was like my dream. So I guess it makes sense that they want to kind of do that. You also have a novel named When the Sea Turns Silver. did you find it more difficult undergoing a novel versus children's books?
So all of my books, I guess, are designated as children's books, mainly because they're
For
for
children.
kindergarten to like 6th grade. So my novels, I have Where the Mountain Meets the Moon, Starry Over the Sky, When the Sea Turns to Silver. Those are probably about for like 4th, 5th, or 6th graders. So
Okay, that's what I
yeah,
was unsure of, so
so
thank you.
yeah, so but it is very different writing a novel versus a picture book. I mean, there's a lot less pictures for one thing, and it's a really different way of storytelling. I remember the first time, my first novel, The Year of the Dog, my editor came back and said, I need you to add at least 2 descriptions on each page, because up to that point I had only written picture books, and of course I didn't put any descriptions in because I was going to put it in the pictures, right? And so she was like, there's
Right,
not going to be these pictures, you have to write it. So it was a learning curve, but I really enjoy both. I realized that, to me, I don't really care about writing or illustrating. I just care about story. I just care about telling the story,
mhm.
and whatever way tells the story best is what I like.
Do parents often reach out to you about your books because they're rooted in life lessons and the integration of Chinese culture? So I'm curious if they
Um,
or if this is a connection they have with their children, and then you kind of get that feedback.
Sometimes they do. Often, usually it's when I do an event or something, when I
Mhm.
have those kind of interactions. Some of them are super grateful. Many of them ask me questions that are way beyond my way beyond my. I'm like, I'm just an author. I'm not like I'm not like a therapist or a sage or a cross cultural expert or anything like that. Um,
Right,
but
right.
yeah, so I do get asked that. I it's Sometimes I get a couple of messages online, but usually that gets filtered through my publicist or my
Mhm.
coordinator or my all these different people who keep me organized.
Yeah. I feel like, too, because you're also a woman in the publishing and writing industry and you focus on Chinese culture, I'm curious if you think that if there's like a lack of representation in the publishing industry for the group.
There definitely used to be, and we could definitely use more. When I
Mhm.
started, there was very, very, very little, very little any
Mhm.
diversity in anything. My book Chinese Menu just hit the New York Times bestseller, which is, I'm so
Oh,
thank you, and I'm
congratulations.
so proud, and I'm so proud of it. But I'm especially proud of it because I remember when I first started, the fact that any book with a Asian character, a black character, any kind of book that even had like Asian culture or black culture or like any kind of culture other than the what we would call Main Street white American culture, for
Right.
anything outside of that to hit the bestseller list was completely unheard of. Like the fact that I
Mhm.
became like this multicultural author and illustrator, that I did all these Asian books, it was kind of like, well, that's great, but kiss any dreams of being on the bestseller list goodbye. Like that's never going to happen. And
Oh,
so to
gross.
me, it's such it's such an amazing thing to see where we are now, that like it's that one of my books could actually hit the bestseller list is almost like a miracle when I
Hmm.
think about where we were 20 years ago, but we could still use so much more. I mean, even though my book's on there, if you look on there, it's like the only book by a person of color on there, and last week when I wasn't on there was nobody, so like I think we could go further. I think we should go further, but at the same time, I want to acknowledge how far we have come, and it's been really great.
Right, right. I think we'll get there at some point. I mean, there's a lot of emphasis on multicultural generations now, especially whether it's Chinese,
Yeah,
Mexican, movies too. The movie representation I'd like to think it has increased. So I'm excited to see where that goes. And your books definitely cater to
yeah.
that
So it's
in
it's an
some.
exciting time, and I hope that we keep going in this direction because I think it's only going to make things better, for everyone.
Going back to Chinese menu, what would you say is your favorite story that you kind of researched? I know I feel like you've answered this before, but I personally wanted to ask you, so let
So
me know.
the story that I like, I don't know if it's my favorite, but the story that I really enjoy telling is the story. of spring rolls. So almost everybody that I know who's eaten in a Chinese restaurant knows what a spring roll is, or at least an egg roll. I hope so.
Yeah.
We call them spring rolls. We call them spring rolls because they're traditionally eaten during the spring festival. But the name of the food has nothing to do with its origin story. The spring roll was actually invented because of a Ming Dynasty minister who was accused of cheating. The thing is that he used to get his
Whoa.
work done twice as fast as all of his other colleagues, and they were so jealous, and they're like, he must be having somebody work for him, he is cheating. And they reported him to the emperor, and they said, this minister is cheating, there's no way anyone can get their work done as fast as he is. So the minister the minister was called in by the emperor, and the emperor said, how do you get your work done so quickly? And that's when the minister gave away his big secret, and he's like, I can write with 2 hands, and that's why I can get my work done twice as fast. And of course, nobody believed him. And so because no one believed him, the emperor said, all right, here's like 9 boxes of records. You have 9 days to copy all these records. If you can really write with 2 hands, you should be able to copy these records and no problem in that amount of time. So the minister went home, opened the boxes, and then he realized there were so many records in the boxes that he would have to be working nonstop, night and day, without sleeping, without eating, even with writing with his 2 hands. So he started to get to work and started writing and writing, not sleeping, not eating, just to try to finish copying all these records. Now, this minister had a wife who was really worried about him, and she was like, you have to eat. And he's like, I cannot eat, I must keep writing with my 2 hands. And so she's like, well, I'll feed you.
I love the
So she's like, I'll feed you. So she tries to feed him like soup and noodles, and he's like, no, I can't eat, I need my hands to write. And so she decided that she had to make a food that he could eat without using his hands. So she invented the spring roll, a rolled food that she could hold and he could bite off while he was writing with his 2 hands. And so that's how the spring roll was invented. And I just think that's such a funny story.
That's hilarious. That is not something I ever would have known had you not told me that. That's a crazy story. It's so interesting where all of these things derive from. How did you just research and find them, stories from old books, talking to people, kind of thing?
That story actually was found, I actually hired a research assistant. Her name was Isabel Brand, and she was a Smith College student in Chinese studies. So she actually found that one. I was actually going to tell the story about the Spring Festival, but she found that one, and I was like, that one's better, we'll use that one. But what originally I did was I had all these stories that I had collected over the years. And that like my father told me, that my relatives told me, that I would see in books. And I asked her to find like secondary or third sources for each of these stories to make sure that they weren't just something my dad made up. So she did. And then she also found extra stories, and so for example, the spring roll was an extra story. She's like, yes, I found your story, but I've also found this one. And I was like, ooh. And so so she was really indispensable. And so it was a mixture of both of our research. And honestly, like I said, I've been collecting stories for years and years. So she was like the fact verifier, even though it's not exactly, I guess it's mythology verifier.
Some sort of verification is going on. I'm curious, I'm not sure if this totally applies because you more lean into the stories of it all, but is there a person in Chinese folklore or history that you found yourself kind of identifying with?
Is there a person in Chinese folklore or history that I find myself identifying with? I don't know if there's anybody I identify with, but I know there's many people I read about that I really admired. One is her name is Madame Qing, and she is a female pirate during the Qing dynasty. And I've always wanted to do a book about her. And she's this, but it's a little bit, I have to figure out how to like kind of clean it up for the kid audience because she was like this. She started off as a prostitute, and then she took over like the whole pirate fleet, and she was so powerful of a pirate that the emperor and the kingdom kept trying to like take her down, but she was so powerful they couldn't take her down until finally they just had to like they basically had to buy her out, and like she retired. She basically retired, and she actually has a happy. Yeah, she had a happy ending. She retired. She opened up a brothel. And she lived happily ever after.
That's amazing. That's when you use your woman influence to your best ability. That's incredible. I don't know, maybe just to kids, just say like she's a woman.
I have to figure out a different way of putting it. But like, so that's why I've been thinking about this story a long time, but trying to figure out how to like
Yeah. I don't know if I'm the best one to consult on that. Maybe get some experts.
But she was pretty amazing because she would never allow any rape or of her soldiers, and of her pirates, and if they ever raped anyone, she basically would kill them. She would castrate them.
I support it.
She would castrate them, and if they took any female prisoners, they either had to marry the female prisoner, or they had to marry them and have them as a wife, or she would push them off the boat.
Wow.
So she was very.
If I had a penny for every time I wanted to push a man off a boat.
So she was very like female, even for a prostitute, and for somebody who like, I think in her own way she was a feminist, like.
Sounds like it.
Yeah. So
really, maybe she was one of the origins of feminism.
Yeah.
Honestly. I would love for that story to go a little further, because I feel like it's so interesting and not a lot of people know about her.
Yeah, in China she's very famous. Like if you say anything like the pirate of the Red Fleet or something like that, they'd be like, "Oh, Madame Cheng," But here in the United States, they might not. She's not as well known. I think they, in the Pirates of the Caribbean. Yes. Like I think you see a little bit. Yeah, you like I think she has like a cameo in the background, but they make her like this like ugly, haggard kind of. But she's actually supposed to be like incredibly beautiful because
Of course.
So.
if she's that successful, she's got to be.
Yeah, she knew how to use everything.
My gosh. If only we were in the same era.
Well, it sounds like it was a tough life.
Yeah, it sounds horrible.
Yeah.
I'm definitely glamorizing it a little bit.
But it would be a very interesting story. So so someday, perhaps that will be my first foray into adult literature.
Yeah, there you go. That would be actually, I would read that.
Or so, YA, maybe YA.
You've got one customer at least.
Yep.
So. Okay, so let's talk about what's next for you. Do you have any other upcoming projects or anything else going on that you'd like to talk about?
Sure. I have a new novel for young, not YA, not adult, no brothels in this one. A new novel that I'm working on right now. It's if you've ever gone to a Chinatown, you'll notice there's usually a Chinese gate that when you enter Chinatown, and in front of the Chinese gate is usually two sculptures of lions. And if you look closely at the lions, one lion is holding a ball, and the other lion is holding a baby cub. And my book is about the cub and the ball, and so that's what I'm writing about now. So it should be a middle grade novel, so for probably about like 4th or 5th graders, if all goes well. It's always, you never know, things might change by the time it comes out, but right now that's the goal.
I've noticed 5th graders are the group I do not connect with as much. They're very difficult.
5th grader, what I think is, it's because 5th graders, it depends on where they're at. 5th graders is when that big change is, and like 6th grade is when the change is there. And like they're a little bit, they're very jaded. It's hard once they're jaded.
That's exactly the term I would use. Yeah. I'm like, I could do the 3-year-olds, but when I make a joke to a 5th or 6th grader and they don't laugh,
you get the eye roll.
Yeah. Yeah, and then I'm just like, okay, never mind, running
It's the
running
third
away.
and fourth graders who are great because they understand everything you're trying to say, and they're not jaded, so that they still laugh, and they're still like so eager to they're so open to
Right,
everything.
right, exactly. So I have a short game for you if you're up for it.
Sure.
I do like a little lightning round, so I'm gonna pin two popular Chinese foods against each other, and you're gonna pick which one
Okay.
you rather have.
All right.
Does that make
Mm-hmm.
sense? Okay. All right. First one: Kung Pao chicken versus General Tso's chicken.
Oh gosh, that's a good one to ask. I would go for Kung
Hmm.
Pao chicken personally because it's a little healthier. And I'm at that age where you need to watch what you eat.
I mean, I should be too, honestly, but here we are.
And they're both super delicious, so I don't feel like I'd be losing out on too much.
Yeah, that's a fair point. All right, second one: Mushu pork versus sweet and sour pork.
Oh, I would go in the mushu all the way. I just love the mushu. You wrap it and like the whole. It's kind of. I always get really messy, but there's something about the whole step process that I love about the mushu pork.
I think I would go sweet and sour, but I think I just like sweet in general, so I
Mm.
think that's
I think it depends on
being for me.
my daughter would definitely go with the sweet and sour before that. She loves especially when they have pineapple, which is of course not traditional, not nothing they would have in China, but traditional in American Chinese food. But she loves it like chicken and the pineapple together.
Oh, that is good. That's underrated. Third one: wonton soup versus bird's nest soup.
Oh, I think that wonton soup, bird's nest soup it's interesting because and I also feel really bad depending on how they got the ingredients, right? So I think bird's nest soup has a really interesting story, but I always worry that maybe they did not get these bird's nest in a very ecologically sound way. So I don't want to support that. So I would go with the wonton because which is also just as delicious.
Yeah, that's good to know. Fourth one: Empress chicken versus beggar's chicken.
Oh, I have never had beggar's chicken. So I would go with beggar's chicken all the way because I am so interested in having that. That's supposed to be like the most delightful chicken in the world. If you've read the book, you will know that
Okay.
beggar's chicken is this special chicken that they basically encased in this like mud cocoon that mud and leaf, special mud and leaf cocoon, and they steam it for like
Yeah.
hours and hours and hours, and then to eat it you have to crack open this cocoon and the meat is supposed to be
Whoa.
so tender and juicy and delicious. It's supposed to be the best. So I would definitely try the beggar chickens. I've never had it before, but I would love to try
I was reading through your book, but I didn't get to that part yet. So I did not know that. That's so insane. That's crazy. That sounds amazing. Wow. Fifth one: egg rolls versus
Oh,
dumplings.
I think I'll go
It's
with the
tough.
dumplings. Egg rolls, especially the egg rolls versus the spring rolls. Egg rolls are really doughy, though, and they sometimes it really depends on where it's done. Sometimes they can be done kind of, and sometimes they're done really well. But dumplings tend to always be pretty good no matter where you go. So like for some reason, dumplings is more of a surefire delicious bet.
All right, good point. And sixth one: this is super general. Noodles versus rice.
Ooh, that is a very touchy question for all Asian people because almost everybody equates rice with Chinese food. But the reason why we in the United States equate rice with Chinese food is because the Chinese restaurateurs that came here during the gold rush and when Chinese restaurants are first being established, they are all from southern China. And southern China, rice is really, really important. But actually, in northern China, it's noodles that's really, really important. And so,
Oh,
so if you
okay.
go to
So
China and you go to
controversial.
northern China, they don't really serve you rice; they serve you noodles. So it's very interesting. I have to admit, we ate rice every day at my house. We were a very rice family. If you gave me the choice, you'd think I would choose rice, but I think I actually like noodles better. Maybe because rice seems every day and noodles seem like ooh special, so I probably choose noodles.
Yeah, I agree. I think the same actually because noodles I don't have as often and they're so good, and rice is like something I eat pretty much every
Yeah.
day, so I would choose rice too. Okay, my final question for you. Normally I do one that's kind of like, what's your favorite thing to splurge on or appliance? But because you're not a chef, I switched it up for you.
Oh, great.
What is what is one Chinese dish that you think everyone should try at least once in their lifetime?
Well, if you are not a vegetarian, I think everybody should at least try Peking duck once in your lifetime, because it
Okay.
is, there's a reason why it's considered quite a delicacy. They say that one of the reasons why Nixon opened up the borders to mainland China was because when Henry Kissinger came to the secret meeting to meet with Chinese people, they served him Peking duck, and he just loved it so much. So there's a reason why they call it like duck diplomacy. So I would definitely say everybody should try Peking duck. If you are a vegetarian and you don't want to try Peking duck, then gosh, there's still so many wonderful foods to eat that are vegetarian. But the one that came to mind, which most vegetarians probably already know about, is Buddha's Delight. And that's because there is a beautiful story about that. And I would recommend everybody read the story and eat Buddha's Delight because it's really lovely.
And can they get that information in your book?
Yes, you can get the story in the book. It's about 18 monks who went and begging for food, but they were not given enough food. Each one was only given a little bit of food, and so none of them were given enough food to make a meal. But when they pooled all their food together, they realized they could make a dish that they could all share, and it was delicious, and it was a delight, and that's what Buddha Delight is.
I love that. So that rolls right into my outro saying you could find the rest of the story if you purchase Chinese menu in stores or online. And you could also follow Grace Lin's journey on Instagram at PACYLIN.
Yes.
Lin.
Thanks so much.
Amazing. Thank you so much. This was a wonderful conversation. And I learned so much. So I appreciate it.
Thanks.
Hey fellow foodies, thanks for listening. Don't forget to leave me a review. And while you're at it, make sure to follow me at Livvin for Food Pod on Instagram or TikTok, or email me at livvinforfoodpod@gmail.com. Let me know what you're cooking up this week, which guests you would like to see on the podcast, or tell me your opinions on the latest viral food trend. Until next time,